You're listening to the Free to Be Mindful podcast, which invites you along on a journey to learn of mindful living, grow in mental health, and inspire through personal growth. In a world where we can often feel much stress and overwhelm, this podcast provides bite-sized tips and real talk conversations, empowering you to embrace mindfulness and nurture your full potential. I'm your host, Vanessa De Jesus Guzman, educator, licensed professional counselor, entrepreneur, and mom. I'm passionate about helping others live life with peace of mind and ease of heart without losing their, here we go. Hello and welcome to episode 199 of the Free to Be Mindful podcast. I hope that you're feeling good, looking good, and doing better in this world than you were yesterday. So, my friends, I am so excited for this episode because this week we are celebrating Free to Be Mindful's 5th birthday or 5th business anniversary. If you're watching us on YouTube, you may see a big number 5 balloon behind me. And the reason for that is it's important to celebrate. Celebrations are a big piece of our lives, and it can help us not only reach our goals, but it can help us actually find fulfillment in life. But before we get to the importance of celebrations, I'd love to share with you a little bit more about Free to Be Mindful as a brand. Before establishing a business, I didn't really understand or even know how much work it took into opening up a business and not just opening up your doors, whether they be virtual or brick and mortar, but actually have it be successful. Data shows that 20% of new businesses fail during the first 2 years of being open, and 45% during the 5 years of being open, and 65% fail during the first 10 years of being open. According to Investopedia, only 25% of new businesses make it to 15 years or more. So when you think about it, a small business being open and successful for 5 years is kind of a big deal. And I didn't always have this mindset. When I first started, it was just another year of checking off the boxes and doing what I have to do. But as I go along throughout my business journey and as my business slowly grows, I have learned to celebrate that it is a pretty big deal. So let me share with you, Free to Be Mindful isn't just this podcast that you're listening to. It's the podcast. It's also a therapy practice where I focus on specializing with kids with school related stress and moms with parenting related stress, which I just shared in episode 198, the episode before this one. Free to Be Mindful also focuses on professional development for schools and speaking engagements for businesses, for associations, all focused on my trademark mindful living framework. And we also volunteer for free therapy dog visits with my therapy puppy, Ollie, who's also my chief emotional officer, I call him, my CMO. We volunteer in schools and libraries within the surrounding areas to bring joy and comfort to teachers, educators, and students, which is again part of that mindful living framework. So, as I say on the podcast, Free to Be Mindful is focused on mindful living, mental health, and personal growth. And this is done through these 3 different avenues of professional speaking, providing therapy services, and through the Free to Be Mindful podcast. And I'm just so happy of the growth that my business has made because it's kind of like bringing a child into this world to a certain degree because you do have to nurture it and care for it and help it grow. And it's going to look different at different stages of its life, so to speak. So when I first established Free to Be Mindful, I was still a full-time school counselor and just providing workshops and speaking engagements to whomever would listen, all focused on mindful living, mental health, and personal growth. I held a successful sold out conference under the umbrella of Amiga Moms, which lives under Free to Be Mindful. And I started off by providing small mindfulness classes for kids in the office until we all went virtually and lived out of our homes for months on end. When that took place, I was fortunate to be sponsored by Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shields of New Jersey, who sponsored my virtual mindfulness classes for kids, which went on for a year and a half. As I then began my therapy practice, only first helping children and then branching out to helping moms once I left my 18-year career in education and then worked on the practice full time. Slowly, with time, the podcast was added and more professional speaking opportunities were added. And then I was fortunate enough to get Ollie and have him trained to become a therapy dog. And now that's been added as well. Although I am the face of Free to Be Mindful, I do have two amazing virtual assistants who help me to provide you with content that can be beneficial for you, whether it be through this podcast, through our blogs and newsletters, through social media, and our YouTube channel, which has its own series living there. This is really important to me because not everybody is able to afford therapy or is able to leave their homes and seek therapy. So I love providing education and information in whatever way it's going to help people understand first what mindful living is, in order to help people understand how they can best help the kids in their lives, whether they're parents or educators or people who work with children, and in order to better understand themselves so that they can find more joy and fulfillment in their lives by living life intentionally. So, because of all these reasons and more, I am so proud of the growth that my business has made. And I'm really looking forward to what's to come. In terms of the podcast, what's to come, I'll share more about that next week when we celebrate episode 200. In terms of the therapy practice, we're going to continue serving children and college kids going through transitions and mothers going through parenting related stress and parenting and life transitions. In regards to speaking engagements, I am looking forward to breaking out of the tri state area and hopefully provide national and international speaking engagements and professional development in order to help make a positive impact on other folks so that they too can learn to live life intentionally. After I have this baby, I'll be putting more focus back on Amiga Moms, which again is under the umbrella of Free to Be Mindful, and we'll be holding in person social events and retreats and so much more. So, I thank you for being a supporter of Free to Be Mindful. I thank you for listening in on the podcast, for reading the newsletters, for following on social media, for asking your questions, and for those of you who come into the office, for trusting me with your life and with your family's life. As I always share, I really do love what I do, and I am so grateful for having the opportunity and the guts to do so, to open up this business and to touch so many lives. So I thank you. But of course, this episode is not just about me and Free to Be Mindful. It does have a lot of points for you because that's why you're here. Now, let me share with you. According to research done by Teresa Ambil from Harvard Business School, people who tracked their small achievements every day enhanced their motivation. The practice principle used small wins so that people would feel better about mundane everyday events in order to find joy and engagement, creativity, and motivation in the work that they were doing. And yes, this applies to life itself, but oftentimes what we find ourselves in is that the big events are what makes us happy. We find this to be true because big events tend to be tangible and they tend to release dopamine when we celebrate where it is that we are in life. So when we think about things like graduations, promotions, anniversaries, holidays, the link that all of these events have in common is that they're established in our minds as something to celebrate or something to reward ourselves, whether it's a physical gift or a mental boost of stimulation. We're so familiar with the celebratory process because it's just a force of habit. And it's just a part of societal expectations that we know or we learn to make the time to reward ourselves for achieving this grand milestone. But remember, even though these events are indeed worthy and significant when we think of the big events, we also have to remember that we should not just celebrate these actual occasions, right? These end all events, because the journey is just as important. The journey that led us to that grand event is just as important. Now, I'll share with you that being raised in a family where it was all about getting straight A's, which by the way, I didn't get prior to getting my master's, even when you just got a 92, the question was always, well, why couldn't you get 100, right? The focus on the journey was non existent because the focus was always on the end goal. However, when we can learn to create the space to take advantage of the opportunity to just focus on the journey, we then allow ourselves to remember our purpose that pushed us toward our dreams and toward achieving this goal, whatever it may be. Focusing on the journey can include focusing on the relationships we build and the people that we meet, the deep connections that we hopefully foster throughout our journey. The time, the energy, the learning, the heart, the soul poured into everything that made these milestones memorable in the first place. All of that is also part of the journey. And when we remember that we are celebrating the journey and not just the end goal, we then remember that it's important to realize it's about celebrating the little things and not just waiting on the next big thing. And my friends, there's actual psychology that explains why we as humans tend to just celebrate the big things. First, it's evolutionary. The idea of collective experiences and traditions that create a sense of belonging, it does indeed move us forward. Second, it's psychological because yes, we do feel a sense of fulfillment, perhaps confidence, and even receive general positive reinforcement when we get a recognition. From a pat on the back to a gold star to a promotion, it just feels good when those around us typically cheer us on. It can also be cultural. Some of our celebrations come from our backgrounds. It can allow us to connect to our beliefs and to our roots. And sometimes it can just be the cultural pressures that our culture sometimes puts on us. As a person who identifies as a first generation student or person, the stories of our families coming here to experience a better life, it's a beautiful thing. But let me tell you, it also comes with a lot of pressures to have to do and have to achieve big things because of the efforts that our family members have made for us. This was discussed a bit in episode 197, which focused on imposter syndrome. And lastly, friends, it definitely has a societal aspect. Oftentimes, a lot of these big celebrations involve others, whether it means seeing people to celebrate with or whether we see others doing the celebration. It can give us a sense of a deeper connection. And when we make space for celebrating ourselves, we do these three things. First, we recognize what brings us happiness and what does have an impact in our lives. Second, we reflect on the highs and the lows that we may have faced during the path of achieving this accomplishment. And third, we focus on rewards because they're fun. Rewarding ourselves for what you have done and taking the time to see what route we want to continue and what has led to the success in the first place is also part of the journey and part of these celebrations. And as we reflect on the tiers to celebration, it can be easy to see that these are elements to small successes just as much as the big ones. So then I ask you, why is it that a lot of us get caught in the loop of only celebrating the big things? There are a few reasons why we do overlook the small things. Well, first, there's the aspects of self constraints because we are the ones that define what is worth celebrating, and we can choose to create this definition. But many times, what happens is that we have unrealistic expectations or put extra pressure on ourselves that we don't see the value of what we really bring to the table. So, for example, if we started a new exercise routine, that's something to celebrate. But oftentimes, what we do is we compare ourselves to the next person who started 6 months or a year before, and then we get hard on ourselves. And when we do that, then we're more likely to give up. Another example would be downplaying our efforts because it's something that's expected, or because we're scared of celebrating, or because of how people will view us, or if we jinx ourselves in some way. So sometimes we are the ones that become the hurdles for our own selves. There's also the aspect of insatiability. Some might say that this comes mixed with perfectionism, but the idea that there is always more or always something out there that's better can live in some of our minds. Although this can be seen as a positive mindset to have in some areas, we should be careful that it doesn't bleed into us feeling like we aren't good enough or that we can't be happy if something happens, no matter how small or how big it is. Then there's also the aspect of perception. So think about being a month into a job and you're figuring out a new project and you want a promotion, but you haven't gotten there yet. Or think about if you're in school and you just switch majors into the field that you truly want to go into and you're thinking about graduation. You're always looking to what's coming ahead. And in the first example of the promotion versus the graduation, it can bring up different emotions, but it's all about what you make of it because you can think about it of it being really out of reach, or you can just focus on showcasing the joy, the growth, and the possibilities as you go along on your journey. Your perception or your mindset about different situations definitely makes the journey either enjoyable or not so fun. There's also the aspect of redirected reflection. We typically don't acknowledge the effort that we put into our small wins or how much resilience, determination, or even sometimes just the hope that we need to have in order to get there. But think about it, my friends. If we hadn't started, we wouldn't have done it. If we hadn't believed, we might have given up. When we reflect, we shouldn't just target the areas of weakness or overanalyze ourselves. And I know I'm guilty of it too. But instead, we should appreciate these little moments and have gratitude for what got us to where we are while we're still getting to where we're going. And of course, everything we talk about always leads back to the concept of mindful living. If we live in a space of a lack of awareness, then we don't allow ourselves to enjoy the right here, right now. And we forget to truly become attuned to our surroundings. And then we spend more time thinking about what could have gone differently or what we should have done in our past, or about worrying about the future. We get so caught up in thinking about our routines or the next thing that we forget to take in the moments as they're happening and just having appreciation of what's in front of us. So know that celebrating small wins is important. And it's not just because it's a reminder of how impactful our thoughts or our actions are. It also keeps us motivated to keep winning, to keep carving out the tools and the resources that we need for more wins, if that's indeed what we want. It reminds us to celebrate our progress and not just the victory. And it reminds us about the mindset that can propel us to reach the end goal. Also, it's an everyday mood enhancer. And who doesn't want to feel better? When we see the silver lining and sunshine in our progress and our achievements, we get boosts of energy, happiness, and confidence that can help us keep going, not just towards that goal, but can help us keep going in life in general when the going gets tough. It also reminds us to check our dialogue, not just about how we communicate with others, but more importantly, our self talk. Do we talk to ourselves in a positive manner? Are we affirming the results that we want to have? Are we practicing grace and compassion with ourselves when we do experience setbacks, or I don't like to call them failures, I call them learning opportunities? Can we make things easier for ourselves? And lastly, when we celebrate the small wins, it encourages us to celebrate each thing like it was the first time that we ever did it. Think about the way that kids typically look at life when they're young. It's like the thing that they're focusing on and the right then and there is the only thing that matters in the world. And as we celebrate, we start to just hopefully not just celebrate the things that we do, but also hopefully celebrate the people that we are. Celebration does indeed lead to more self love, which is a really good way to improve our relationship with others and again with ourselves. Because at the end of the day, when we look in the mirror at the end of the night, we should be happy with the reflection that we see. And I don't mean it just who we see, but really what lives inside our hearts, what lives inside our souls, of our intentions, and how we're showing up in life in every day. And if that feeling is not there, well, that's where therapy can come in. And I encourage you to seek help if needed. So, my friends, as I celebrate this 5 year anniversary of Free to Be Mindful, I hope that you too take the opportunity to celebrate these small wins. It's not just about the year anniversaries, it's about the little things that happen each and every day. I really am happy that I have the gift of doing what I do, and I love what I do because I know I'm making an impact in someone's life. And maybe you don't feel that exact same way, But when you lay your head on the pillow to go to bed, I want you to think about what are the things that you are grateful for. Maybe it's career based. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's that you actually had the strength to get out of bed today. And all of those small accomplishments eventually lead to the big things. I hope that you believe in yourself as much as those who care about you do too. I now invite you to join me on this short guided meditation. So, my friends, as you take a breath in and a long, slow breath out, think about the aspect of celebration and think to yourself, what is the last big thing you celebrated? Was it something for yourself or something for someone else? That typically comes very quickly into our minds. Now I want you to shift gears, and what's the last little thing you celebrated? It doesn't have to be an achievement of some sort. It can be, again, getting out of bed. It can be putting a little bit more effort into the way that you show up that day. It can be going for a walk if you hadn't done so in quite some time. Texting or calling that person who we haven't spoken to in a while, or perhaps the person who challenges us the most. It can be reading a paragraph of a book that's been sitting next to your nightstand, playing with your kid for 2 minutes instead of sending them to play on their own. It can be saying, I love you to someone who needs to hear it. With each of these thoughts and each of your answers, embrace the space for more joy and abundance in your life. And keep broadening that space to see all that is possible. Remember, friends, to celebrate the little things in order to dream bigger. And also remember that in a world where you are free to be anything that you want to be, you are always free to be mindful. Catch you next week.